We tend to think of history as a settled story, a book that's already been written and put on a shelf. But what if entire chapters are missing? Today, we're diving into a historical cold case, the incredible survival of pre Christian beliefs in Europe centuries after we thought the continent was completely Christian. And our investigation starts with one very strange piece of evidence. Okay, let's set the scene. The year is 1789. The French Revolution is kicking off. George Washington is president of the United States. And way up in a quiet parish in Estonia, a Lutheran pastor named August Wilhelm Hupel is just casually writing down what he sees his neighbors doing, sacrificing a black rooster to an earth goddess. I mean, really, let that sink in. An earth goddess in the Age of Enlightenment. This isn't some tale from the ancient Roman Empire. It's the beginning of the modern world. This one little account is like a historical glitch in the matrix, a clue that the official story we've all been told might not be the whole story. And that is our central puzzle. So, what is that official story? Well, it's the one we all learned in school. It's a story of a swift and total conversion, where Christianity just kind of swept across Europe and completely replaced all the older, so-called pagan religions. And if you look at the timeline, yeah, it seems pretty definitive. By 1387, Lithuania finally converts, and that's it. The book on organized European paganism is officially closed. From then on, Europe is Christendom. Case closed, right? Well, as any good detective knows, an official report is just the beginning of the investigation. The evidence on the ground, the paper trail, the artifacts, it all points to a much more complicated and, frankly, a much more interesting reality. So, let's put on our investigator hats and actually follow that evidence. Where are the clues that these older traditions didn't just vanish into thin air? Now, what's absolutely wild about this slide is just the sheer amount of time we're talking about. Look at this. Estonia is officially Christian around 1227, but more than 450 years later, the church is still putting out warnings against pagan practices. And then, over 650 years later, you've got priests battling local grain spirits. This isn't some faint memory. It's a living tradition. And this quote is our smoking gun, the paper trail. This isn't some historian looking back. This is a church manual from the 17th century, a catechism, explicitly telling people, hey, stop worshiping the world around you. The hills, the stones, those sacred groves, don't do that. And here's the crucial part. A warning like this only makes sense if people were actually doing it. The church wasn't worried about ancient history. It was worried about what was happening in its own parishes right then and there. So our evidence really falls into three main buckets. We've got the paper trail, these eyewitness accounts from frustrated church officials. We have the actual physical artifacts, sacred groves and offering stones that people kept using for centuries. And then we have the oral trail, ancient myths that survived only in songs, like the incredible Finnish epic, the Kalevala, which wasn't even written down until the 1800s. So all this evidence leads us to a really fundamental question. Clearly, this wasn't a simple case of one religion just replacing another one. It seems like people were living in two worlds at once, going to church on Sunday, but also leaving an offering at a secret spring on Monday. How on earth was that possible? To solve this puzzle, historians have come up with a really fascinating model that they actually borrowed from linguistics. It's a concept called creolization, and it completely changes how we think about religious change. Think of it this way. Creolization is what happens when two different languages are spoken in the same place for a long time. Instead of one language winning out, a totally new, stable language emerges from the mix, like Haitian Creole, which grew out of French and West African languages. Well, it turns out the exact same thing can happen with religion. So instead of thinking about this as a failed conversion, that paganism was just too stubborn to die, creolization sees it as a kind of religious innovation. It wasn't a battle where one side had to win. It was a long, messy, creative process that resulted in something brand new. Let's look at a perfect example of this in action. Before Christianity, Estonians had a household spirit that brought good fortune. Then Christian missionaries show up and introduce Saint Anthony, who is a protector of animals. What happens? You get a new figure, Tun, who acts a lot like the old spirit, but is now celebrated on Saint Anthony's feast day. The old belief wasn't erased. It was just filtered through a new Christian lens. Okay, but that raises another question. Why was this process so strong? And why did it last so long in Estonia and the Baltics? What made this region a special case? Well, there were a bunch of factors that created a kind of perfect storm. The region was remote, the church wasn't very well established, and there were huge language barriers. But honestly, the biggest reason was social. Christianity wasn't seen as this liberating new faith. It was the religion of the foreign, German-speaking landlords who owned all the land. And this quote just says it all. There was simply no incentive to fully buy in. Converting to Christianity didn't improve your life. You were still an Estonian peasant, and you could never become one of the German elite. So Christianity just stayed on the surface, while the older ways of life continued right underneath. But even with this fantastic model of creolization, our investigation is far from over. In fact, uncovering this hidden history really just shows us how much we've permanently lost. And this is really the elephant in the room. We can see the outlines of the rituals, the offering left at the stone, the special respect for a grove of trees. But what did those rituals actually mean to the people doing them? What were the deep beliefs and stories that gave them power? These are the true cold case files of history. We have these tantalizing clues, like the name of a god, Terra, mentioned just once in an old chronicle. But we have no myths, no stories about him. We'll probably never know exactly how people understood their own unique blended faith. These are mysteries that might never be solved. And honestly, that's what makes this so compelling. It's a powerful reminder that history isn't just a dusty book of facts to memorize. It's an active, ongoing investigation filled with clues, dead ends, and amazing mysteries that are still unfolding. Which leaves us with one last thought. If a story as big and fundamental as the Christianization of Europe has a hidden history this complex, what other stories that we take for granted are just waiting for a second look? What other histories are hidden right there in front of us?